yes. Yes, it is Chatting Up the Chick. It is the podcast you've been waiting for. Well, unless you watch the other 22. But actually, was that 22? I haven't done that many. It is episode 17. It is Chatting Up the Chick. It is the Feels. It is Chris the Chick. We are talking about deconstruction within the Christian religion, and we are up to number 5? Yes, number 5. This is the 5th pod in the series. We've done 2 podcasts on our journey in Christianity and where it's led us to. Then we spoke about what the Bible was. Then we discussed what God meant to us. And this week, we're getting into the nitty-gritty. We are going to be talking about...
Hang on, Chris. I'm going to have to stop you there for a moment. I'll be right back.
Well, I'm going to keep going because, you know, that's what I'm talking about. Right, it is it's the podcast about my main man, Big JC, Jesus the Christ, not Jesus Christ, because he didn't have a surname. He was Jesus Bar, son of Joseph. Oh, look, he's back. Anyway, so yeah, feels what a complete. Yeah, I've decided he is a complete knob. Right. So we are discussing.
Like a doorknob?
Like a doorknob. Yeah, you're useful only in 2
I
separate
open doors.
circumstances.
Yeah, I open doors. Yeah, thank you very much.
Smashing people in the face, and yeah. So yeah, we're discussing this week Jesus and the historical person that is Jesus. I'm not sure how this conversation is going to go, but I did do a tease before at the end of the last podcast about certain things that were said by Jesus that could be described as pretty egotistical and full of himself. But we will get into that anyway, and we will discuss what that means to us. The thing about this podcast, it could go on for hours and hours and hours and hours. I'm a huge fan of his. I'm also very interested in how other people portray Jesus, because there's other people who come to me and say, why are you a follower of Jesus or a fan of Jesus? And he said this, and this. And I'm like, oh yeah, I've never really looked at it from that perspective. So I'm very happy for people to put messages on this podcast. Yeah, saying he's a knob. But look, if you want to say that, that's entirely up to you. Like, I think he's a great guy. Anyway, before we get into it, I wrote something down after our God conversation, and I thought, because I was listening to a guy called Richard Rohr, who is a Catholic Franciscan monk in America, and he said something so profound that just kind of really resonated with me. So I'm going to break the 4th rule of public speaking, and that is reading from a piece of paper. But he went on to say what God is, and he's put, what is God? God is a story that changes the course of our human existence. It is no longer a case of whether people believe in a God or not, but what God does your story portray. That's what he says is the most important thing about the idea of a God. What story does your God portray? Because he's coming from a perspective of the old God story was based around like violence and inequality, war, destruction of the environment, stuff like that. Whereas this new found idea that's really picking up pace around the world is a God of life, a God of like we were saying last time about equality, a world with no violence, stuff like that. And also, especially in this day and age, like with how the economics are going, where the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, there's so much wisdom within the Hebrew scriptures, especially when they talk about like the year of God's favor, when like the slaves go back, they're no longer slaves. This is the 50th year, and all the land goes back to the original owners, stuff like that. It's like, oh, this is definitely standing. There's like a reset.
Edit that out.
there's like a reset button that the Hebrew scriptures talk about, where if anyone's had to get into debt or lose their land or become a slave, because that's the only way they can survive, even though in the 21st century slavery is abhorrent and we just don't believe in slavery. But yeah, this reset button where everything's reset, everyone gets their land back, everyone goes back to an equal state. Because as we know, the world changes in different ways through no fault of your own. Like, you know, if you're a subsistence farmer and you're farming the land, but there's no rain, well, you're not going to get any crops. But someone 10 kilometers down the road might get loads of rain. It's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to suffer in the way where you lose everything and that's it. There's no chance of ever getting it back. So I like this whole idea of the Jubilee, year of God's favor, where everything is reset.
Yes. Well, I mean, I don't know. I kind of got lost in thought when you said when the rich are getting richer, and that is true to a point. And I think in today's age it's not money is a, you know, the way I'm kind of learning it is now is that money is not an actual thing that is going to be around for much longer, actually. And I think the people that are with that knowledge will be the ones that are the first ones to kind of like take hold of all that. And that might be the poorest countries of the world. I think there will be a distribution, but again, that's just another topic of that.
Oh yeah. Well, look, you whoever's got the power and the power to use resources are the ones who are in the best shape. And yeah, like you said, it doesn't have to necessarily mean money. It can come in all shapes and sizes. But anyway, that was just a thought that I had after the last podcast, just thinking about what kind of story does your God portray as a way of understanding what you believe in, i.e. the divine and stuff, rather than do you believe in God or not. Well, for me, that's no longer part of the conversation. Like I'm more interested in, you know, what story do you believe in? What's the story that you believe in? Because that will portray what kind of a God you believe in per se. Even if you don't believe in a God, like, you know, atheism and stuff like that, you still believe in something. You still believe that something will make your life better, or something is out there that will give you joy and contentment and whatnot.
For sure, yeah. I actually saw quite a nice quote, and it basically went like this. It went, belief is not derived from a choice, but it's derived from conviction. And I think it like speaks in many kind of like realms, essentially. Like even in Christianity, you could resonate with that, and you can also resonate with that outside of Christianity. You could resonate that as an atheist, or anybody really. I think, you know, everybody is convicted of something, and that's what kind of like, you know, is the story that we tell each other or tell ourselves, essentially. And that's kind of what you're touching on, is that it's a story that we tell ourselves, or we are convicted of, is but yeah, I feel exactly the same way in that regards. It's not even a story. It's not even a matter of whether it's a Christian God or a Muslim God or this, that, the other. It's like whether that God that you believe in is actually reflecting the things that you're trying to, that, you know, the things that you are believing in are actually coming out of you, rather than just saying words and no actions.
Well, it's like me main understand Mahatma Gandhi. He said, which I totally agree with, this little tidbit of knowledge, was that he said there are as many gods as there are people on this planet, because everyone has. You may say, "Yeah, I believe in the God of the Christians," or like you said, the God of Islam, or whatever it is, but everyone has a succinct idea of what that God is, and they're never going to line up with each other like with everyone else. And so everyone has their own picture of a divine being, of a God, or whatever it might be, or even if it's just a mindset, an ideology. Everyone has a different idea of what that is. And so I agree with Gandhi when he says that there are as many gods as there are people on this planet.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also speaks further than that. I think it is trying to touch on that, the things that you're reflecting are the things that you're praising, I guess. So.
Yeah. Well, the best way to find out what really matters to you is where you spend your money. It's a great way of figuring out what really matters to you.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe your free money if you have any.
No, but I mean, yeah. If you just get, it's a great thing to do, actually. Look at your bank statement and look at where you're spending your money, and that's where.
Food, yeah.
Yeah. That's generally where your heart lies, so to speak. Like
in my stomach, unfortunately.
Like obviously, you pay bills and stuff like that. Your heart doesn't lie in paying bills, and I understand that. But I mean, yeah, your disposable income and stuff like that gives you a good idea.
For those that have any.
Yeah, if you've got any, privileged to have a bit of disposable income. I got $20 this week. Woohoo! That's 5 points. Right, don't want to advocate for drinking.
Yeah.
Let's get on to JC, big Jesus. Right. So we're not going to get into a discussion about who Jesus is. And a lot of discussions I've had with people is whether he actually existed or not. I'm not really interested in those kind of discussions. I'm more interested in, okay, if you don't believe Jesus existed, that's fine. Whatever. But the sayings, the teachings, they exist. So I couldn't care less if it was Bob the Builder who came up with those teachings and sayings. Those are what.
Are those.
Yeah, those are the ones that have merit. The fact that we have those teachings, we have those sayings. Same with Buddha. Same with you could Vishnu, whoever from Hinduism. Same with Muhammad. There's certain sayings, teachings that hold merit. They have truth. They have universal truth, and they pervade over cultures. I'm coming from a cultural context of Jesus is where I've landed. It doesn't mean I ignore all the rest, because that's just ignorant and arrogant of me to do that. So the whole discussion of whether Jesus existed or not is null and void for me. I don't know about you. Is that the same for you, or
the Jesus existence?
Like some people use the argument of saying, well, Jesus never really existed, so what you're believing is all a load of rubbish.
No, I don't believe that.
No. But I'm just saying, I'm just taking that off the table just because that's been
right. Yeah. No, I mean, for me, it's I do believe that it happened. I think it's one of the biggest events in history that has been kind of well defined. And sure, you can argue history about everything then, if that's the case. I mean, some of the historical things that we discover are, maybe 5% true, and rest of it is very much kind of like ideas of what we think actually happened, but we can't really say for sure because it's in the past. There's no technology to take a picture for us and say, "Hey, look, there's Jesus in the picture."
Yeah.
So you know.
So who, or the person of Jesus, who is he to you? I know it's a very broad question, but you could take it in any direction you want.
Look, I mean, put it simply, he was a man, if anything.
Yeah,
But
but
at the
who is
same
he to
time,
you?
well, to me, I think he was one of the most profound teachers that ever has set foot on this planet. Um, uh, More than that, he paved the way, essentially. He showed everybody that, you know, there is a way to do things, and he was the first example, essentially, or maybe not the first example, but every other example didn't really make it as far as he did.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people will counter argue that by saying things like a lot of the like Taoist like the wisdom teachings from China came many thousands of years before Jesus. Then obviously you've got Jesus wasn't, from my, like, this is from my understanding, Jesus wasn't unique in his teachings per se, because everything that he learned and brought together was from his understanding of the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think it's even in the Bible. It says there's nothing new under the sun,
Mm,
and you know, it's not like he. It's like even with um, the idea of prophets. Prophet is not a person who is potentially going to predict the future. Here's just someone who is pointing people back to an original standard, per se.
mm.
You know, so you have prophets like Muhammad and all these other ones, and you could call maybe Gandhi or Buddha or whoever a prophet, but all of them are doing exactly the same thing as one another. They're just pointing people back to a standard of, you know, what they should be going back to, rather than they're redirecting people's paths. So all these teachings, even in other religions and other, beliefs, of course they're going to be universal. Of course they're going to sound very close to one another, and you know, and that's what I think Christianity kind of fails at, is that, it's not like they have the ultimate truth. It's like the truth is already out there. It's not like it's, you know, buried in the Bible and nobody else has it. That's kind of selfish of us. It's actually still out there. Everybody has access to it, because how else can, like, God reach the people that don't have any exposure to the Bible, right? So there has to be another way. So,
So
well,
this kind of brings me to my next question, because the emphasis from the Christian perspective is put upon Jesus being more than just a mere man.
yeah.
So how does that fit now in how you see, like, your journey um, into the
Look,
future?
I mean, yeah,
With
I get what you to be honest, it hasn't really changed, because I think, from what we know in history, I can't say for certain. I just have to believe it. Um, I don't know of any man that has walked you know, such a path for all their lives. Unlike him, even Gandhi, and you know, when you look at the history of every one of those individuals, sure, they came to these spiritual awarenesses through mistakes, essentially. And I think that's kind of like the biggest crux to our humanity, is that we typically come to a realization when we've made a grave mistake. You know, I can say from my own experiences that when I learn something, is typically by making a mistake, and by saying, yeah, okay, I know now not to do this, right? I know now this is not a good way to do this, so I don't do it. Where Jesus didn't really seem to do that. He didn't really seem to follow that pattern as such. Um, does that make him a divine being? That's arguable. I think from my perspective, he just presented presented something to the world that has never been ever done before, and that's what kind of makes him unique in my eyes. I don't think he's whether he was God incarnated in a man's body. It's very hard to tell, very hard to prove at this point, and it doesn't really matter.
Well, yeah, well that was because my the hardest thing about coming out of Christianity is you hold that kind of baggage of the theology that you're taught.
Yeah.
So you're taught that Jesus was the Son of God. He was, well, within our tradition, he was the Trinity. You having an earthquake there in New Brighton?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
no, it's a big truck that drove past.
Yeah, that he was part of the Trinity, which makes him on par with this being that is called God. So he has this divine nature, and because of the theology, a lot of people get behind the whole idea of that Jesus came to the earth to satisfy God's wrath, so that when you die you could go to heaven and all these kind of. And look,
that's just so disconnecting with the rest of humanity, right? Like we're literally disconnecting God from the rest of humanity when the purpose of that act, even if he is part of the Trinity, even if whatever you just said, and he came down and he humbled himself and he came down several steps, as whatever you've been taught. The purpose of that was to show that he can be a man and do it. And so if we're making him out like to be this holy being, even in a man's body, then we are disconnecting him from the purpose of what he was trying to achieve.
Interesting. Interesting perspective. See, for me, Jesus is and this is kind of going to go into my next question, which was alluded to at the beginning of the podcast and at the end of the last podcast. Jesus showed us a way to do life that was fundamentally based in a true way of creating a new existence that he called the reign of God or the kingdom of God, whatever you want to call it. That, and even though I keep harking on about it, it just needs to kept on being said, that this new way of doing life that was the reign of God created that existence for everyone, where there was no violence, there was no inequality, there was no oppression, there is no fear. It's all derived around a love for one another that comes from a place of understanding each other as images of the divine. So just being an image of the divine is a reason to make sure we look after each other. Like it's like people who, especially in a church setting, talk about the love they have for this God, this divine being. But yet, if you turn around to those people and say, okay, how can you abstractly love something you can't see? There's a disconnect there. You can't abstractly love something that you can't see. I can't say, oh yeah, I love lamp. No, I love I'm failing. I'm failing on my analogy here. But what I'm trying to say is that to abstractly love something that you can't see, you have to love something you can see. Yeah, that's the logic. That's the rationale. So for me to love something that I can see, well, I can see everything that's around me. And if what is said about the divine is true, that God is been there from the beginning, he'll be there at the end, you know, he, she, it, the spirit of God is within everything, and I mean everything, then by loving nature, loving your fellow human being, loving animals, you know, loving everything that has an abstract being, then by that alone, you are showing your love to this divine being. But yet, when you start talking about that in Christian circles, and you start talking about you start talking about loving nature, loving animals. Well, yeah, look, people love animals to a certain degree. People love nature to a certain degree, but when you start pointing out the systematic, and I'm going to call it sin because it's destructive, sin is just a destructive nature, the systematic sin that creates the destruction that we see on the world, whether that's through killing animals, chopping down forests, whatever it is creating an existence for us now that is
sinful.
No, it's intrinsically doing us harm, even though we may not see it ourselves. You only have to look at COVID. The whole reason COVID is here and the viruses are here is because we have created a world where these viruses are now being opened up to human beings. Because I was actually listening to this podcast. Sorry, I'm going on a complete tangent. I was listening to this podcast about people who go out to find viruses, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of viruses just living in the jungles, but they don't come to human beings because obviously we don't frequent into jungles and stuff like that, because that, you know, that the jungle is for itself. It's like the heartbeat of the world, you know, especially like the Amazon. That's where the CO2 carbon is taken in, and it regulates the rest of the world. But as soon as we as humans start this destructive path of ours, now we're unleashing stuff that should never have been unleashed, because for our insatiable appetite for wanting to consume. But Christian circles, you bring this up and people are just like, oh yeah, but that's that's important, but what's really important is that I love God and I believe Jesus died for me so that I can go to heaven when I die. Like, and then look, it's simplistic, I know, and it's more to it than that. But in reality, that is the destructive mindset that is continuing to keep the world on the trajectory that it's on. And that's a big call from me.
I agree. I think it's like, we use Christianity as a scapegoat. I think we use it also in other ways as a scapegoat, not only towards the planet, but also I think towards our own paths as well. I think we sometimes get into a pattern and we don't own our mistakes, yet we always seem to go back to, you know, forgiveness as a way to make yourself feel better, but rather than addressing the fault, you dress it up with, you know, prayer or something like that, without actually going back to the original person and sorting it out with that person. I think it doesn't happen in Christian circles all that often. I mean, if you look back at the Hebrew culture, you know, it's pretty much like forced upon. You know, before you give money to me, you know, go and sort out your quarrel with people, you know. And that's what, you know, God is trying to do, is essentially just sort out this, have harmony amongst his people, and amongst not only just the people that exist in the church, but also outside of the church, you know. And I think that's where we come back to that same point, is loving your enemy. Is why are you guys enemies in the first place?
Yeah.